The first thing I noticed was the smile. The young guy inside the booth looked completely comfortable, like stopping ranch owners on a Tuesday morning and charging him $25 was just part of his regular routine. At first, I actually wondered if I'd missed something. Maybe there was a construction project I didn't know about. Maybe they were doing repairs and set up a temporary entrance. But then I looked around and realized I was standing exactly where I'd stood for most of my life. It was 6:58 in the morning when I drove my old Ford F-250 down the same ranch road my dad helped build decades ago. The sun was just starting to rise over the Texas hills. The cattle were moving toward the east pasture, and my coffee was still sitting right there in the cup holder. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. I mean, that road had been part of my family's life for generations. I knew every curve. I knew exactly where rainwater collected after storms, which fence posts needed replacing after strong winds, and the old live oak tree near the entrance where my father used to stop and check the property markers. So when I came around the final bend and saw a white barrier arm blocking the road, I knew something was wrong before I even saw the sign. Beside the barrier stood a brand new toll booth. It had tinted windows, cameras, payment equipment, and fresh landscaping around the base. A polished sign stood beside it, Silver Creek Estates Access Gate. $25 access fee. I slowed the truck and stared for a few seconds. The crazy part wasn't that someone had built a gate. It was that they'd built it on my road. I stepped out of the truck and looked around again. The limestone fence my grandfather built was still there. The cattle guard with the old rust mark was still there. The live oak tree was still there. Everything was exactly where it should be. Except for the booth. A young man stepped outside, holding a small payment device. He looked polite, almost apologetic. "Good morning, sir," he said. "The access fee is $25. I looked at him. "The access fee for what?" He glanced toward the booth. "Using the road." I pointed ahead. "This road?" He nodded. "Yes, sir. Those are the HOA rules. Everyone entering has to pay." I had a dozen questions running through my head, but I stopped myself. The young man wasn't the person who made this decision. He was just the guy standing there because someone told him to. Instead of arguing, I stepped away from the truck and walked closer. That was when I noticed the part that bothered me most. The concrete. The foundation underneath that booth was brand new. Fresh concrete, fresh gravel, new landscaping. Someone had spent serious money putting this here. Then I saw something almost hidden beneath the live oak tree. A small piece of limestone sticking out from the ground. Most people would have walked right past it. I didn't. I'd seen that marker since I was a kid, and my dad taught me what it meant. Every time we checked the property lines, he'd stop there and tap the stone with his boot. "Remember this," he used to say. "Fences can move. People can argue. But the markers tell the truth." I never forgot that. I looked from the marker toward the booth foundation. Then I looked again. It wasn't a huge difference. Someone driving by would never notice. But I wasn't someone driving by. I'd spent my entire life on that land. A few feet can mean nothing to most people, but on a property line, a few feet can mean everything. I didn't pull out my phone. I didn't start recording, and I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood there and looked. The attendant shifted his weight. "Sir." I turned back toward him. "No, thank you." He looked confused. "You aren't going through?" I shook my head. "Not today." I climbed back into my truck and slowly backed away from the barrier. Behind me, a few vehicles had started lining up. One driver looked annoyed. Another tapped his steering wheel impatiently. They probably thought I was just another stubborn ranch owner refusing to follow a new neighborhood rule. They didn't know what I'd noticed. As I turned toward the county road, I saw Vanessa Whitmore standing near the HOA clubhouse. She had a coffee cup in one hand and a tablet in the other. A local news crew was filming nearby, while several board members admired the entrance. Vanessa was smiling as she pointed toward the toll booth. She looked proud. Not nervous, not uncertain. Just proud. I pulled onto the shoulder a short distance away and turned off the engine. For a few minutes, I just sat there. Looking back, that was probably the moment everything changed. Not because I was angry, because I wasn't. I was just trying to understand how someone could build something this permanent without checking the paperwork first. I reached for my phone and called Claire Donovan. She answered on the second ring. "Morning, Cole." I kept watching the entrance as another vehicle stopped at the barrier. "They built it." There was a short pause. "Built what?" I looked toward the old limestone marker beneath the oak tree. "The gate." Another pause. Then Claire asked the question that mattered. "Where did they put it?" I looked at the toll booth standing beside the road my family had protected for generations. Then I answered quietly, exactly where I hoped they would. For the rest of Tuesday morning, I tried to do something I'd done my entire life. I tried to move on and take care of the ranch. But that was easier said than done. The cattle still needed feed, the fences still needed checking, and the equipment still needed attention. Ranch work doesn't stop just because someone builds a surprise gate across your road. But every time I looked toward the entrance, I found myself thinking about that concrete foundation. Not the booth, not the sign, not even the money they were collecting. It was the location that bothered me. I knew that land, and I knew exactly where the boundaries were. Around noon, Claire Donovan pulled into my driveway. She stepped out of her truck carrying a small notebook, wearing that same calm expression she always had when she knew there was more to a situation than what people could see. Claire had helped my family with property matters for years. She wasn't the type of person who rushed into a fight. She was the type who wanted every single fact before making a move. We sat on the porch while I explained everything. The gate, the toll booth, the attendant, the $25 fee, and the foundation near the old survey marker. She listened the entire time without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question. Did you pay them? No. She nodded. Good. I smiled. I figured you'd say that. Cole, the first mistake people make in situations like this is reacting before they understand what happened. She looked toward the road in the distance. The second mistake is accidentally helping the other side create an argument. I leaned back in my chair. So what do we do? Claire took a sip of her coffee and looked toward the entrance. For now, nothing. I laughed. Nothing. Nothing that gives them a reason to change what they're doing. She explained that sometimes the smartest thing a person can do is allow others to continue. Let him make decisions. Let him finish projects. Let him create their own records. People are very careful when they think they might be wrong, she said. But they're usually much less careful when they think they've already won. Later that afternoon, we drove up to a small hill overlooking the entrance. A line of cedar trees gave us a clear view without making us obvious. From there, we watched the entire operation. Contractors were still working around the booth, electricians were testing the payment system, and landscapers were adding final touches around the sign. Residents slowed down as they passed, and some even stopped to compliment the HOA board members nearby. Vanessa Whitmore moved around the entrance with complete confidence. She checked the flower beds, spoke with contractors, and smiled for photographs. She looked like someone opening a business she'd spent years planning. Then, a drone appeared above the road. It rose into the sky and began recording everything below. The camera captured the toll booth, the concrete foundation, the utility work, the landscaping, and the road itself. Vanessa and several board members stood beneath it, waving toward the camera. Claire watched the drone for a moment, then lowered her binoculars. That's interesting. What is? I asked. They're documenting everything. You mean the gate? She shook her head. I mean the entire project. By late afternoon, the first video appeared on the Silver Creek Estates community page. It showed the entrance from above with music playing in the background. The caption called it a permanent improvement designed to benefit residents for years to come. I watched it twice. Then I saved a copy. After that, I saved the photographs, the announcements, and every public post connected to the project. Claire looked at the growing folder on my computer. You know what's unusual? She asked. What? Most people start collecting evidence after something goes wrong. She pointed toward the screen. These people are creating theirs before anyone even asks. More posts appeared throughout the afternoon. Pictures of the construction, updates from the HOA board, and messages thanking residents for supporting the project. Then, just before sunset, another announcement popped up. The HOA was hosting a grand opening ceremony on Saturday morning. There'd be refreshments, local media coverage, community leaders, and a ribbon-cutting event. Vanessa invited everyone to see what she called the future of Silver Creek Estates. I looked at Claire. They really believe this is going to work. She watched another vehicle stop at the barrier in the distance. I think they do. How can someone be that confident without checking something like ownership? Claire looked back toward the entrance. Sometimes people see what they want to build before they check whether they have the right to build it. The sun dropped behind the Texas hills as the toll booth lights came on. From where we stood, it looked impressive. Clean. Expensive. Official. Someone passing by would have assumed the HOA had created a major improvement for the community. But Claire and I were looking at something else. We were watching a group of people build a story about themselves. The crazy thing was, they were also leaving behind every detail needed for someone else to tell the real story later. Wednesday morning started with a call from Claire before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. "Bring the property binder and meet me by the old oak tree," she said. "I want to compare something." I knew exactly which binder she meant. It was the same worn leather binder Emily had, organized years earlier. The corners were scratched, and some pages had yellowed with age. But inside were decades of records my family had carefully kept. I carried it across the pasture toward the ranch road. The morning was quiet. The kind of quiet you only notice when something important is about to happen. The old live oak stood beside the road exactly where it had for generations. Claire was already there with a county plat map spread across the hood of her truck. She'd also brought copies of the access agreement and several older property documents. "Before we decide anything, I want to verify everything," she said. "A feeling isn't enough. We need the records." That was one of the reasons I trusted Claire. She never wanted to just win an argument. She wanted to know the truth before there was even an argument to begin with. We walked toward the limestone marker beneath the tree. Most people would have never noticed it. It was small, weathered, and almost hidden beneath the grass. But my family had always known it was there. Claire carefully cleared the area around it and compared the markings with the county documents. "This is the original survey monument," she said. "Everything starts here." She looked toward the toll booth in the distance. Then she looked back at the map. "Now we see where the measurements lead." We walked the distance from the marker toward the entrance while Claire checked the recorded plans. The closer we got, the more the picture became clear. The road itself wasn't the issue. Residents had permission to travel through. The concern was everything that had been added around it. The concrete foundation, the utility lines, the landscaping, the permanent improvements. Claire stopped near the edge of the entrance and looked over the documents again. "I think I know what happened." "What?" I asked. "Someone confused access with ownership." She explained it in simple terms. The HOA had permission to use the road, but that didn't mean they owned the land beneath it. They could drive across it, emergency vehicles could use it, and certain maintenance work could happen there. But none of that gave them the right to build a permanent structure or create a business operation. "It's like borrowing someone's driveway," Claire said. "You can use it to get somewhere, but that doesn't mean you can build a store on it." That was when I realized how simple the mistake was. The HOA didn't need a complicated excuse. They just needed to believe one right automatically came with another. After that, we drove into town and visited the county records office. The clerk recognized Claire and brought out the files connected to both the ranch and Silver Creek estates. We spent the next several hours reviewing documents that most people would never think about. The original deed, the subdivision plat, the access agreement, maintenance records, and previous filings. Each document added another piece to the same picture. My family owned the land. The HOA had access rights. Nothing showed a transfer of ownership, nothing showed permission for a toll system, and nothing showed approval for permanent commercial improvements. Claire requested certified copies of everything we reviewed. Before leaving, she completed one final request, an official county boundary verification. "This is the part that matters," she said while signing the form. "Not what you think happened. Not what they think happened. What the county confirms happened." On the drive back to the ranch, my phone started buzzing. Another update from Vanessa appeared on the Silver Creek Estates page. This time, it was a video showing the entrance from above. The drone moved over the toll booth, the foundation, the landscaping, and the road around it. The caption called it a permanent improvement for the future of the neighborhood. I saved the video before closing the notification. Claire glanced at the screen. "Another one? Another one." She shook her head. "They really want everyone to see this project." That afternoon, we returned to the hill overlooking the entrance. The scene below looked almost unchanged. Residents continued stopping at the barrier. Contractors continued finishing details, and Vanessa continued preparing for Saturday's celebration. She walked around the entrance with the confidence of someone who believed the hard part was already finished. I looked back at the oak tree behind us. That old marker had survived decades of storms, changes, and construction around the property. It never needed a sign, and it never needed a speech. It simply stayed exactly where it was supposed to stay. Claire closed her notebook and looked toward the toll booth. "They think this is a story about controlling a road," she said. "But it isn't. I looked at her. Then what is it about? She looked down at the county documents in her hand. It's about whether someone can build something permanent on land they never owned. Thursday morning started with the sound of county vehicles arriving near the ranch entrance. I was standing beside the north pasture fence when I saw two white trucks pull onto the shoulder. At first, I thought they were just passing through. Then I noticed the equipment being unloaded from the back. Survey tripods, measuring tools, orange flags. The kind of equipment people bring when they're no longer interested in opinions. They're interested in exact answers. Claire arrived a few minutes later and parked beside me. She stepped out, looked toward the survey crew, and gave a small nod. This is what we needed. I watched the county surveyors walk toward the old live oak tree. They weren't there to support my side or challenge the HOA. They were just there to verify what the official records showed. And that was exactly how I wanted it handled. No arguments. No assumptions. Just facts. The crew carefully uncovered the limestone marker beneath the tree and compared it with the county information they'd brought with them. They checked the identification marks, reviewed their notes, and began measuring from the original reference point straight toward the entrance. Watching him work brought back memories of my dad. When I was younger, I never understood why he cared so much about those old markers scattered around the property. To me, they were just stones in the ground. But my dad always stopped whenever we passed one. He'd tell me something I never forgot. A fence shows where someone decided to put a line, but a survey marker shows where the line actually is. At the time, I thought it was just another lesson from an old rancher. Standing there years later, I finally understood why he repeated it. While the county crew worked near the entrance, Silver Creek Estates was busy preparing for Saturday's grand opening. The timing was almost surreal. On one side of the road, surveyors were quietly checking boundaries. On the other side, the HOA was making the project look even more impressive. Workers planted fresh flowers around the booth, volunteers arranged tables beneath white tents, and contractors adjusted the final decorations. The blue ribbon was already hanging across the entrance. Vanessa Whitmore moved through the area like everything had already been decided. She checked the landscaping, spoke with contractors, and greeted residents who stopped to compliment the new entrance. A local reporter arrived and recorded another interview with her beside the toll booth. Vanessa talked about improving the neighborhood, creating convenience, and building something that residents would appreciate for years. I saved the interview, not because she said anything unusual, but because every time she explained the project, she revealed more about what she believed she had created. Claire watched the recording later that afternoon. She really thinks this is permanent, she said. Does that matter? I asked. Claire nodded. It tells us how she understood the situation. The survey crew continued working closer to the booth. They checked their measurements more than once. They compared the physical location with the recorded documents, marked points, and wrote down their findings. Nobody from the HOA came over to ask what they were discovering. Nobody even questioned why the county was measuring the entrance in the first place. The crew wasn't there to debate. They were there to document. Around noon, another drone appeared above the entrance. This one flew lower and captured even more detail. The camera recorded the toll booth, the foundation, the utility connections, the landscaping, and the road around it. Vanessa and several board members stood below, looking up and smiling toward the camera. I watched the drone disappear into the sky. They keep recording everything, I said. Claire looked toward the entrance. That's what happens when people believe they have nothing to worry about. By late afternoon, the county trucks packed up and left. The surveyors didn't make an announcement. They didn't explain their findings to anyone standing nearby. They simply collected their equipment and went back to prepare the official report. The entrance looked almost perfect as the sun started going down. The lights around the booth turned on, the flowers looked fresh, and the signs looked polished. From the road, it appeared exactly like the successful neighborhood project Vanessa wanted people to see. Claire and I watched from the hill overlooking the entrance. Tomorrow changes things, she said. I looked toward the toll booth. Because the county has the answer? She nodded. Because after tomorrow, nobody has to guess anymore. I looked back at the old oak tree. The limestone marker beneath it had been there long before the HOA ever existed. Long before the toll booth, and long before anyone thought about charging people to travel that road. It never needed a celebration. It never needed approval. It simply stayed where it belonged. Friday morning felt different from the moment I stepped outside. Nothing about the ranch had changed. The horses were still moving through the pasture, the wind was still crossing the fields, and the old live oak still stood beside the road exactly where it had stood for generations. But after the county survey the day before, I knew we were no longer trying to figure out what happened. We were just waiting to see what the official answer would be. I was checking the water lines near the east field when Claire's truck came through the gate. She stepped out holding a document tube and a folder under her arm. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look excited. She just looked like someone who had spent years learning that paperwork usually speaks louder than people. We walked into the kitchen, the same place where Emily used to organize family records every Sunday afternoon. Claire placed the folder beside the old leather binder that held our property documents. It was a strange contrast. One set of papers represented generations of careful ownership. The other represented a project the HOA had built in less than a week. The county finished the review, Claire said. She opened the document tube and carefully removed the official survey map. The county seal was printed right in the corner. They confirmed the boundary. I leaned closer as she pointed to the first marked line. This is the recorded property line. Then she moved her finger toward the entrance area. This is where the foundation was built. The distance between the 2 points wasn't dramatic. Someone looking from a distance would never notice. But property lines aren't measured by what looks close enough. They're measured by what's recorded. The foundation crosses onto your land, Claire said. The utility work does too. And part of the landscaping is completely outside the approved area. Hearing it officially confirmed felt different. For days, I'd suspected something was wrong. Now, the county had put the answer on paper. Claire placed the access agreement beside the survey map. This is where the mistake happened. She tapped the agreement. They saw permission to use the road and assumed they had control over everything connected to it. She explained that the agreement gave Silver Creek Estates residents the right to travel through the area. Emergency vehicles could use the road, and certain maintenance responsibilities were allowed. But the document never transferred ownership. It never gave permission to build a toll facility. And it certainly never allowed the HOA to create a revenue operation on private land. They treated access like ownership, Claire said. Those are completely different things. Before we could continue reviewing the paperwork, my phone buzzed. Another notification popped up from the Silver Creek Estates community page. It was another video from Vanessa Whitmore. This time, she was standing beside the toll booth explaining the next stage of the project. She talked about expanding access beyond residents. Delivery companies, contractors, service providers, everyone would eventually contribute through additional fees. She described it as a future source of income for the neighborhood. Claire watched the entire video without saying a word. When it ended, she looked at me. That helps. Because she admitted they wanted to collect more money? I asked. Because she explained the purpose of the project in her own words. I saved the video with the rest of the file. By then, the evidence was no longer just a group of documents. It was a complete timeline created by the HOA itself. They announced the project, they filmed the construction, they posted the photographs, and they explained the plans. They recorded their own intentions. Claire spent the next hour organizing everything for the county attorney. She placed each item in order. The deed first, then the access agreement, the survey results, the photographs, the videos, and finally, the public announcements. Nothing needed to be exaggerated. Nothing needed to be added. The facts were enough. What happens now? I asked. Claire closed the folder. Now the people responsible for reviewing it will make the decision. And after that, she looked toward the entrance in the distance. After that, we let the process work. Later that afternoon, I drove down near the entrance but stayed far enough away from the crowd preparing for Saturday's event. Workers were setting up tables, volunteers were arranging chairs, and the blue ribbon was stretched across the road. The booth stood exactly where Vanessa wanted everyone to see it. Finished. Impressive. Permanent. That was the part one kept thinking about. The more effort they put into showing everyone how permanent it was, the more clearly they showed everyone what they'd built. Claire stood beside me, watching the preparation. Tomorrow is going to be interesting, she said. I looked toward the entrance where people were already gathering. Do you think they know? She shook her head. No. She watched Vanessa speaking with reporters near the booth. And that's why tomorrow matters. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, the entrance lights came on. From a distance, everything looked exactly the way Vanessa had imagined. A successful improvement, a neighborhood achievement, a project worth celebrating. she'd spent the entire week making. Sure, everyone saw the gate. She just never expected everyone to see the mistake underneath it. Friday afternoon was quieter than I expected. After everything that had happened during the week, I thought I'd feel relieved once the county confirmed the survey results. Instead, I felt something else. I felt like I was waiting for a door to open. The answer was already there. The paperwork was complete. Now it was just a matter of watching what happened next. The ranch continued as it always had. The horses moved through the pasture, and the wind crossed the fields. The old oak tree stood beside the road, completely unaware that a piece of paper connected to its roots had become the most important document in the entire situation. Claire called me after lunch and asked me to meet her at the house. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw the table covered with folders. She'd organized everything perfectly. The original deed, the historical survey, the access agreement, the county measurements, the photographs, the drone footage, and the public announcements. Every decision the HOA had made was arranged in order. The county attorney reviewed the file, Claire said. She handed me a written summary. I read through it slowly. The language was formal, but the meaning was dead simple. Silver Creek Estates had permission to use the road according to the recorded agreement. They did not own the land. They didn't have permission to install a permanent toll facility, and they didn't have approval to create a revenue operation on private property. Claire pointed to the survey map. This is why these situations come down to paperwork. She tapped the page. The survey shows where something was built. The records show whether it was allowed. I looked at the documents spread across the table. My dad used to say that property disputes were rarely decided by who sounded the most confident. They were decided by who had the paperwork to support what they were saying. When I was younger, I thought he was just being practical. Sitting there with Claire, I realized he was absolutely right. She opened another folder and pulled out a certification from the county records office. We checked one more thing. She placed it in front of me. There's no lease, no separate permission agreement, no written approval from you or anyone before you. I looked at the page. So they never even asked. Claire shook her head. No, they assumed. That explained the entire situation better than anything else. The HOA didn't spend days trying to hide what they were doing. They truly believed they had the authority to do it. They built first and planned to explain later. Outside the kitchen window, I could see the road leading toward the entrance. Workers were still preparing for the grand opening. White tents were being arranged, tables were being placed, and decorations were being finished. The blue ribbon was just waiting. From a distance, nothing looked different. Claire picked up her phone and made a short call confirming the county enforcement package had been received. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When she ended the call, she placed the phone back on the table. Everything is moving forward. I looked toward the entrance. What happens now? Now we let tomorrow happen. Later that afternoon, another video appeared on the HOA community page. Vanessa Whitmore stood beside the completed toll booth, speaking confidently about the future of Silver Creek Estates. She thanked residents for their support and repeated her plans for expanding the program. More access points, more fees, more revenue opportunities. Claire watched the video carefully. This time, she didn't look surprised. She keeps explaining the project. You mean she's helping our case? I asked. Claire shook her head slightly. She's helping the facts. I saved the video with the others. By then, the file was no longer just evidence. It was a complete story of how the project was created, promoted, and expanded, all before anyone stopped to ask the most important question. Before Claire left, she closed the final folder and placed it inside her briefcase. Tomorrow will be different, she said. I looked toward the entrance in the distance. Because the county will be there? She nodded. Because everyone else will finally see what the paperwork has been saying all along. After she drove away, I stood on the porch and watched the lights around the toll booth turn on. From far away, it looked impressive. It looked official. It looked like something that belonged there. That's the strange thing about appearances. A structure can look permanent in just a few days. A crowd can make something feel legitimate. A confident person can make people stop asking questions. But none of those things changed ownership. None of them changed the records. The next morning, Vanessa had invited everyone to celebrate what she believed was her biggest success. She just didn't know the same crowd would be there to watch the exact moment everything changed. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of energy people have when they believe they're about to witness something important. Before the sun had fully risen over the Texas hills, Cars were already gathering near the Silver Creek Estates entrance. Volunteers carried coffee and breakfast trays beneath white tents. A photographer walked between the decorations, capturing pictures of the flowers, the signs, and the new toll booth that had become the center of attention all week. A small local news crew adjusted their cameras toward the stage where Vanessa Whitmore planned to announce what she believed would be the future of the neighborhood. From a distance, everything looked exactly the way she wanted it to look. The entrance was clean, the landscaping was finished, and the blue ribbon stretched across the road. The toll booth stood in the middle of it all, like a symbol of progress. I watched from a hill about half a mile away, sitting inside my truck with the window rolled down slightly. Claire had suggested I stay away from the crowd, not because I needed to avoid anything, but simply because there was nothing left for me to argue. The records were complete. The survey was finished. The county had reviewed the information. Today wasn't about proving something to anyone. It was about letting everyone else see what the documents had already shown. Down below, the toll booth was operating just like it had all week. Vehicles moved toward the barrier. The attendant collected the $25 fee, receipts printed, and cameras recorded. Every person who paid was adding another piece to the timeline the HOA had created. At 7:15, my phone rang. It was Claire. "Everything is ready," she said. "The county attorney has the complete file. The sheriff's office has the documents. Everyone involved has the same information." I looked toward the entrance where people were beginning to gather around the stage. So now we wait. Now we let the process happen. A few minutes later, Vanessa stepped onto the stage. The crowd applauded before she even started speaking. She smiled toward the cameras and thanked residents for supporting the board's vision. She thanked the contractors, she thanked the volunteers, and she talked about improvement, convenience, and the future of Silver Creek Estates. The cameras captured every word. The strange thing was, the attention she wanted so badly was also preserving every single detail of the moment. After her opening remarks, volunteers handed out glossy brochures showing aerial photographs of the finished entrance. The pictures highlighted the toll booth, the landscaping, the road layout, and the improvements surrounding the gate. Residents looked through the brochures while standing only a few feet away from the actual structure. Then Vanessa announced the next stage of the project. She explained that the HOA planned to expand the system beyond residents. Delivery companies, contractors, and service providers would eventually pay additional access fees. She described it as a long-term financial opportunity for the community. The crowd reacted positively. Some people nodded, and others started discussing what the additional income could support. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Claire. She just answered the question. I looked at the screen for a moment, and I knew exactly what she meant. Until that moment, someone could have argued that this was simply an entrance improvement that went too far. But Vanessa had just explained the future herself. She'd described the toll booth as a revenue system. She told everyone exactly what she intended to build. The evidence wasn't hidden in a private conversation, it was standing on a stage, with a microphone. As the ceremony continued, I noticed small changes in the crowd. A few residents who'd been smiling at the entrance started looking more carefully at the brochures in their hands. One older man near the parking area compared the aerial photograph with the road right in front of him. A contractor who had worked on the project looked toward the foundation and then back at the county survey map. Nobody caused a scene, and nobody raised their voice. But questions were beginning to appear. That's how facts usually work. They don't always arrive with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes they simply give people a reason to look closer. Vanessa continued speaking while reporters recorded everything. The ribbon was still waiting, the cameras were still rolling, and the crowd still believed they were witnessing the beginning of something successful. Then, in the distance, a white county vehicle appeared on the road. A second vehicle followed behind it. Then a marked sheriff's office truck turned toward the entrance. The conversations around the stage started fading. People looked away from Vanessa and toward the approaching vehicles. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Claire. "It is happening." I watched the vehicles move closer. The same entrance that had been prepared for a celebration was now becoming the place where everyone would finally learn what had been built and whether it had ever been allowed. At first, most people thought the county vehicles were arriving as part of the ceremony. That was the crazy thing about that moment. Everyone had gathered expecting another speech, more photographs, and the official opening of a project they believed would become a permanent part of Silver Creek Estates. Nobody expected the celebration itself to change. The first White County vehicle pulled onto the shoulder near the entrance. Another followed right behind it. Then the marked sheriff's office truck turned into the parking area. There were no sirens, no urgency, and no attempt to create a scene. The vehicles simply arrived, and the people inside stepped out with the calm confidence of officials who already knew why they were there. The cameras that had been focused on the stage slowly turned toward the entrance. Reporters moved closer. Conversations got quieter. Volunteers carrying coffee trays stopped walking. Even the residents who'd been talking about the new gate a few minutes earlier began watching carefully. Vanessa Whitmore stepped down from the stage with that same confident expression she'd worn all morning. She walked toward Sheriff Daniel Brooks, clearly expecting to welcome another guest to her event. "Are you Vanessa Whitmore?" the sheriff asked. She smiled. "Yes. I'm the president of the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association." Sheriff Brooks nodded and handed her a sealed envelope. "This is for you." She accepted it without any concern. After all, this was her event. She'd spent the entire week preparing for this moment. She opened the envelope and began reading. At first, her expression barely changed. Then she reached the second page. The confidence on her face started to fade. She looked toward the county surveyor standing nearby, then back at the sheriff. "I don't understand," she said. Sheriff Brooks remained completely calm. "The county has completed its review." He explained that the official survey confirmed portions of the permanent improvements connected to the toll operation extended beyond the authority granted by the recorded access agreement and onto privately owned land. The county order required the toll collection operation to stop while the matter moved through the proper process. He wasn't there to argue with her. He wasn't there to create a public confrontation. He was there because the review was complete and the records had already answered the question. The county surveyor then unfolded a large map right across the hood of a county vehicle. Reporters gathered around, and several board members stepped closer. The surveyor pointed out the original property markers, the recorded boundaries, and the exact locations of the Booth Foundation, utility work, and landscaping. The explanation was simple enough for everyone standing there to grasp. Silver Creek Estates had permission to use the road, but they didn't own the land beneath it. They didn't have approval to install a permanent toll facility, and they certainly didn't have authority to create a revenue system using private property. The difference that had been ignored all week was suddenly impossible to miss. Access wasn't ownership. Permission to travel wasn't permission to build. A road agreement was not a construction permit. The crowd became quieter with every explanation. Some residents looked back toward the entrance, while others looked down at the brochures they'd received earlier that morning. The same aerial photographs that had been used to promote the project were now helping everyone understand exactly what had happened. One homeowner who'd been excited about the gate earlier walked back toward the survey map. He studied the lines carefully, then looked at the foundation near the entrance. "So this was never their land?" he asked quietly. The county surveyor answered, "The records show who owns it." The man nodded slowly and stepped away. A contractor who had worked on the project reviewed the survey information and spoke quietly with his crew. He didn't argue. He simply waited for further instructions. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. The facts were already right in front of everyone. The attendants inside the toll booth looked toward Vanessa, waiting for direction. Sheriff Brooks calmly explained that toll collection was suspended under the county order. They stepped away from the payment equipment and collected their personal belongings. They weren't the people who created the plan. They were simply the people hired to operate it. County Public Works employees began following the written instructions. They documented the equipment, secured the payment terminals, and opened the barrier arms so vehicles could pass through without stopping. Drivers arriving at the entrance slowed down as they passed the unexpected gathering of county officials, cameras, and paperwork. Many of them had driven through that gate all week. Now they were seeing it from a completely different perspective. From the hill, I watched quietly. Claire had been right from the beginning. The strongest evidence was never going to come from an argument. It was always going to come from the records. The old limestone marker beneath the oak tree hadn't moved. The deed hadn't changed. The access agreement had always meant the same thing. The only thing that changed that morning was that everyone else finally had to look at the same facts I'd seen when I first stopped my truck at that barrier. The ribbon stayed exactly where it was. That was the detail people remembered most afterward. It was still stretched across the entrance, waiting for a celebration that never happened. The blue fabric moved slightly in the morning breeze while county officials continued reviewing the paperwork that had changed the entire event. Just an hour earlier, residents had been taking pictures beside the toll booth. Now they were standing quietly, watching the same structure become the center of an official decision. After Sheriff Daniel Brooks delivered the county order, everything moved calmly. There was no shouting, no argument, no dramatic confrontation. The Public Works team reviewed the instructions, checked the equipment, and followed each step carefully. This wasn't about embarrassing anyone. It was about completing a process that had already been decided by the records. The payment terminals were handled first. The equipment that had collected fees throughout the week was documented and secured. The attendants gathered their personal belongings and stepped away from the booth. Like I said, they weren't the people who designed the project. They were just the ones hired to run it. Around them, the crowd remained unusually quiet. Many residents had arrived expecting a celebration. They'd brought their families, taken pictures, and listened to Vanessa explain how the entrance would represent the future of Silver Creek Estates. Now they were watching county employees explain why the project couldn't continue in its current form. Several residents looked back at the brochures they'd received earlier that morning. The glossy pages showed aerial images of the completed entrance, the booth, the landscaping, the road layout. The exact same pictures that had been used to promote the project were now showing everyone exactly what had been built. One homeowner who'd been excited about the gate earlier walked back toward the survey map. He studied the boundary lines carefully, then looked toward the entrance. "I thought the HOA owned this road," he said quietly. The county surveyor shook his head. "The records show the ownership." The homeowner looked back at the booth for a moment and slowly nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't defend the project. He simply understood. That's the thing about clear paperwork. Once everyone can see the same information, opinions become a lot harder to maintain. The road itself was never the problem. Residents still had access, and emergency vehicles could still travel through. The issue was the permanent structures and the revenue operation built way beyond the authority granted by the access agreement. The difference became obvious once the lines were drawn clearly. Permission to use land is not the same as permission to develop it. As the morning continued, County Public Works prepared the entrance for the next stage. The barrier arm was removed. The payment equipment was disconnected. The cameras and related systems were documented and taken down. The crew worked carefully and followed the instructions they'd been given. Nobody celebrated the removal. Nobody needed to. The result came from the documents, not from emotion. Later that morning, a flatbed truck arrived to remove the toll booth itself. The structure that had taken days to build was carefully lifted and secured for transport. The flowers around the entrance remained. The banners were still hanging, and the stage where Vanessa had delivered her speech was still standing. It created a strange picture. The decorations for a victory celebration were still there, but the centerpiece of that celebration was disappearing. Vanessa stood with several board members nearby, watching quietly. The cameras that had been invited to record the grand opening continued filming. They were no longer recording the beginning of a neighborhood success story. They were recording the exact moment everyone learned why ownership and paperwork actually matter. Once the roadway was fully open again, I started my truck and drove down from the hill. I'd stayed away because I never wanted this to become a personal fight between me and the HOA. The documents were stronger than anything I could say. As I approached the entrance, Sheriff Brooks recognized my truck and gave me a polite nod. I returned the gesture and continued forward. For the first time in days, I drove down the ranch road without stopping at a barrier that had never belonged there in the first place. A week later, Claire came back to the ranch with the final county confirmation that the process was complete. She placed the letter beside Emily's old leather binder, the same binder that held decades of property records. I looked at the worn cover and thought about all the years my family had spent protecting those papers. "Your father understood something important," Claire said. "What was that?" I asked. She looked toward the road outside. "That good records protect good land." After she left, I walked toward the old live oak tree. The limestone marker was still right there beneath its branches. The fences still followed the same boundaries. The ranch looked exactly as it had before any of this happened. The only thing that changed was that everyone finally understood something my family had known for generations. Land doesn't belong to the person who builds the biggest sign or the one who speaks with the most confidence. It belongs to the person whose ownership is supported by the records. My dad used to say that land doesn't need to argue for itself. It simply stays where it belongs and waits for people to pay attention. The marker never moved. The paperwork never changed. The truth was there from the very beginning. Everyone just needed the right moment to see it.